So, for us to kind of understand how the law of mirrors actually works, we are going to look at our psyche, specifically our unconscious and the collective unconscious, and how that really works to integrate both the masculine and feminine understanding of what being human is. Because as we start to understand that the spirit is something that is a significant role that determines how we are relating to the world and how the world is actually perceiving us, then we can understand how we go through this process of understanding what our persona is, what our shadow is, and what our anima and animus is. So the anima, you can think about as ma, is the feminine aspect of our collective unconscious. The animus is going to be the masculine process of going through life. So when we look at these two inner forces, right, we call it the soul life, the thing that actually animates us, the thing that gives life to this essential being that we are, human being. So the psyche contains and embraces both the feminine and the masculine, right? So from the women's aspect, the animus is the unconscious masculine, and then on the other side, the reciprocal, the anima, ma, is going to be the collective unconscious of the feminine. Now, from a spiritual aspect, we look at readings like David Data, where we have this polarity, right? With any pole, there's going to be a reciprocal. So if there's a north, there's going to be a south, and south, north, etc., etc. So we have to understand the role that these feminine and masculine energies, if you want to call it something spiritual, or at least the functions within ourselves that play roles to have the ability to relate as whole human beings. Because most oftentimes what is occurring within ourselves is that there is a separation, and that is what Carl Jung calls the individuation process, because we are becoming now holistic, right? There is no separation as to what we see within the world and what we're feeling and understanding within ourselves. So as we see the world, so are we. And it's not that we're trying to see ourselves out in the world, it's that the world is now being seen as a reflection of who we are. Now, when we look at the equal balance of heart and mind, the psyche relies on the contra-sexuality to compensate for the natural one-sidedness. Now, what is the contra-sexuality? So contra-sexuality is basically the reciprocal. So for the spectrum that someone may be on when it comes to masculine and feminine energy, there's going to be a reciprocal transaction or dynamic with the outside world. So the more that you are on the on the side of the pole of being more masculine, then the outside world is going to test you or have some form of dynamic that has become the balancing act for an equilibrium for us to actually have a happy life. Now, these roles play a significant determination on how we think and feel about our lives, right? So, the innermost chambers of our hearts is how we bring the spirits within ourselves and how others are perceiving us, how they're becoming aware of us. So there is something within ourselves that's trying to manifest out in the world. Most oftentimes what occurs is that women are trying to see if we are the masculine spirit that is going to go through the darkness. This process of becoming self-aware is how we become self-conscious. So, due to our thinking and feeling, from our belief systems, we have certain actions that give us certain results. And because of those results, we derive meaning, which essentially create our paradigm. This paradigm is a set understanding of ourselves, of how we're functioning. It's an infrastructure. Now, we say set in this aspect because that's how we're perceiving it, because that's what we think we are. And once we have created that identity, that role, or that persona, then it makes it very difficult for us to see anything outside of what we know of ourselves. So we have to go through this whole process of shadow work to kind of see how that's actually reciprocating within ourselves as we go through life. Because as we learn through just physical maturation, we go through child, adolescent to adulthood, just like we do with our amelioration or the development of our consciousness. So you can have someone that goes through the physical developments, but their cognitive, emotional, or their psyche development has been stagnated because of some form of imprint or experience, or how they're actually relating to the world. Most oftentimes it makes it very difficult for them to actually have relationships because of the experiences that they've had prior to. Now, when we're looking at these archetypes, right, these archetypes form a bridge between the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious. So once again, when we look at the law of mirrors, right, we're looking at 4 laws. One is, if there's something that someone does and it bothers us, we have to understand that's something that is saying we need to work it through, right? Because we're not relating to that person for some reason or whatever that may be, that we've given reason that that person is separate from us. On the other aspect, if there's something someone does to us that blames, judges, hurts, and we take that personally, that's something that is repressed within ourselves that we need to work through. So most oftentimes this happens through childhood or adolescence, where something tragic or there's a consecutive amount of things that collect after time that we start deriving meaning, as we mentioned before, that we say that that's us. Then we look at things that we admire, love, and appreciate in others, and then we have to start seeing how that's relatable to us, because again, if you spot it, you got it. So if you start seeing things that you appreciate in people, it's very important that you don't create the separation once again, that that person is different from you. It's just an echo. And then on the last end of the law of mirrors is that on the 4th law, if there's something that someone does or says and it doesn't bother you, then it has nothing to do with you. If it doesn't hurt you, or you don't feel judged or blamed, then it has nothing to do with you. The only issue with this is that even if it didn't, we find some way to derive meaning from it, because we have to understand, what does it say about me? Now, we're looking at the displacement as we are separating things, right, within our minds, within our psyches, within our emotions, and the integration process of that, how that really works. So when we look at women, they're looking at the animus, right? When we have an integrated animus with women, we have good rational logic ability, right? You see these with women that are really good with mathematics, the ability for clear, non-attached thoughts. We're looking at a strong center, right? They're firm within their values. They're more integrous, right? They, when they say something, they mean it, right? They follow through with their word. Good external strength within persona, within their own person, and then problem-solving skills. Now, when we're looking at the displacements of the animas, we have these characteristics that are almost as if they're acting out. Now, if someone knows that they're acting out, it's not as bad as a problem, because they can actually try to fix it, because it's still within that conscious awareness. Now, if they don't know they're acting out, then it's because it's unconscious and it becomes a real problem. So this is people that are the know-it-alls, bullying, Sometimes they're even sadistic, right? They like inflicting pain. They like hurting people, hurt people, hurt people. They're controlling. They're loud, and they have this difficulty, or maybe even an inability, because of how severe the um, the disparity is within the relatedness of trying to make meaningful relationships or trying to be effective with it, because it may seem that they're able to do it sometimes, but they're not consistent with it, or they're not effective in a way where it doesn't hit such a surface level aspect of the relationship. It's more profound and deeper once they become more integrated within themselves. Now, why is this very important? Because as we see the world, so are we. And the most important thing that we're starting to understand is how we go about our relationships. Now, the most primordial relationship that we've understood has been our parents. So, of course, if there is an absence on any aspect, whether that's mother or father, they will find some form of surrogates. Now, when you ever read like The Crisis in Masculinity by Leanne Payne, they talk about, she particularly speaks about how the masculine actually affirms their child, because it cuts the umbilical cord, if you want to say, right? Because when we're in the womb, the only relationship that we actually know is the one that we have with our mother. So if the masculine or the male role in this instance does not allow that affirmation of who they are, then they will find it within the world. Okay? And that's what actually creates a lot of difficulty to kind of understand themselves, because they're trying to find this masculine grounding or pillar to, I guess, affirm who they are. So this could lead to trying to find that masculine energy or influence in different kinds of men. Now, with men, it's a little bit more finite because of how singular it is when it comes to the feminine role. So, when we look at the stages of development in terms of the integration of the animus, you start to see how women are attracted to certain kind of men. So, we look at the unconscious, primitive, and physically vital men. So, because of where they're at within their development of the integration of the animus, they will be attracted to the Tarzan, right? Now, he may not be the most savvy or intelligently spoken individual, but he's strong and he's vital, okay? And you see this most oftentimes when we go to bars, right, where it's a very primal setting where everybody kind of just becomes so inebriated that they fall down from a level of consciousness, and that's what it becomes, okay? It's an unconscious primitive that has physical vitality. Now, that's what they will be attracted to, and that's what they're going to attract within their lives. And again, we're looking at the inability to effectively and meaningfully relate to people. So if there is some form of sadism or controlling or bullying, then they're going to try to find someone that can reciprocate with that, and that most oftentimes leads to some form of domestic violence. Then we start looking at the later developments, right? At this point, now it's not as primitive, okay? Now it's still unconscious, okay? And a great example would be like James Dean, A Rebel Without a Cause. This undirected masculine energy is all over the place, right? You see these Elvis Presleys where they're womanizers, right? And it's not that they're unattractive about it, it's just that just because of who they are, they're attracting these women that are also unconscious to that pattern. So that's why they have this love you, hate you dynamics. And that's why they still fall within the same kind of cycle when it comes to the reparation and separation of the dynamic or relationship. And then we start becoming a little bit more sophisticated within that aspect, because now they're becoming more attracted to a more intelligent individual, such as a James Bond, right? Suave man of the world. Now, the suave man of the world is going to be someone that is very non-committal. Why? Because of who he is, and of course, that's going to be a constant pattern within their lives. Once you start getting into the later stages of development, you look at individuals that are more creative, they're integrated within their masculine, they're attractive, but they're also androgynous. Okay, now these individuals could be like Richard Branson or Steve Jobs. Okay, now there is a form of direction, leadership, um, understanding of how people work, leader of men, but yet not as primal, right? It seems like uh, they have kind of evolved in some way, somehow. And that's how we start seeing the more integrated, evolved stages of the masculine, okay? So you start seeing politicians, you start seeing uh, philanthropists, you start seeing individuals that are very successful within their domains, and they have this form of leadership, okay? In the real world, right? Not just in the primal setting, okay? On one aspect, if you got down to a place in the world where everything just kind of crashed, if it was like Y2K, then we would look for these Tarzans, we would look for these James Deans to lead us, because the technology or these other aspects that are now important as our society has evolved are not in the right place, right? They're not necessary at that point anymore, right? It's about who's the strongest will survive, right? The strong prevail over the weak, and the smart prevail over the strong. So that's how we're starting to see how the development works. Now, when we start looking at the later stages of development, then we start seeing at the spiritual incarnation. So as we started with the talk, women are always trying to see what is the balance between this animal and spiritual aspect of a man, right? So we have these animal, human, and spiritual aspects to ourselves that have to be integrated. So now that we're looking at the process of the stages of development, we look at the masculine part of it, right? We look at men and how an integrated anima allows us to kind of see what kind of women men are attracted to. So when we look at these integrated animas, we're looking at how they're more self-soothing, self-nurturing, self-loving, right? You see individuals that are falling into these lower levels of development because they've lacked that nurturing side of the universe, or the collective unconscious, if you want to call it that. And why is that? Because of this crisis in masculinity, if you want to call it, because either women have tried to replace that masculine role, or because of our old traditional um, philosophies of how to be a man aren't allowing themselves to evolve, right? So they're trying to force something that it is not allowing the new integration when it comes to this new development, right? Uh, these old traditions are hard to kill, if you want to call it anything, but it's not allowing them to actually find new solutions, because they're holding so dearly to that boys don't cry, men drink whiskey kind of thing, which, they have their rite of passages in their own traditions. The only thing is that it's not allowing them to actually evolve. Okay, their level of consciousness are stagnating. So when you are developing within your levels of understanding, logical learning, consciousness, you're starting to understand that the world is evolving. And there's a reason why there are people in power that are very intelligent. So if you're not moving in the world intelligently, even though you have these very powerful strengths of survival and replication, you're still going to fall behind because eventually the bell curve is going to move and transition and leave those individuals behind. And that's why it's become very difficult for them to accept that. So because of that inability to accept, then this ability to access their empathy or their ability to feel life or the ability to relate to others and be happy is very, very challenging for them, okay? Because they have repressed so much of that feminine, and as we learned from the law of mirrors, it makes it very difficult for them to even have meaningful or effective relationships, because not just with another partner, right, or lover, it's everywhere, right? Because they don't trust each other, because they keep thinking that it's the law of the jungle, dog eat dog world. And that's what causes more displacement within the anima, because they're constantly trying to seek some external gratification, some external affirmation, right? It's uncontained, right? You see these individuals, and I like using the bar setting because it's probably the most primal setting that we have in terms of humans, is that they're loud, right? They need to prove themselves, and of course they will attract those kind of women that are attracted to that kind of Tarzan, where it's unconscious, primitive, and physical vital, right? So you'll see these individuals at the gym and they'll like pump, and even though like they may be hurting their physical structure because they aren't really thinking about how their bodies work, or you know, how damaging it can be when you're doing things that wear and tear your body. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to them, because for them suffering is very, very important, right? So they have this masochist perspective of life, and they're greedy, self-centered, moody, bitchy, right? And they lack creativity. So because of this lack of creativity, they feel they're incompetent or just unintelligent in this aspect, and that creates resentment. It creates some form of resistance towards others that they may maybe appreciate within another, but because they haven't actually learned to tap into that or to find some form of integration within themselves for that, they try to overpower or dominate another person, right? It could be that they were at a bar, and even though someone may be half their size, they need to prove that they're stronger because of some insecurity of their intelligence, because of the long in the aspect of the longevity of their lives. They've always felt incompetent towards those individuals, so they have to dominate them in some way, somehow, even though they may be younger or smaller. They need to feel as a man, right? Because for whatever reason, that's how they've been taught. And again, going back to the bar setting, they are single, older, have poor relationship skills, and they have to find something to give meaning to their lives. Okay? So, when we look at the whole aspect of the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious, now we're starting to understand why that happens and how we see the world is who we are. as we see the world, so are we. So, when we are now understanding that it's not what we do, but how we do it and why we do it, we start getting down to the core of our shadow work. When we look at our shadow, then we start to see the things that we've rejected and repressed within ourselves, and where we actually need to start doing most of the work to allow ourselves to be happier within ourselves. It allows us to actually have more meaningful relationships. Because, again, you're going to attract certain people that are attracted to certain characteristics to you, but there are going to be certain characteristics of you that are going to, quote unquote, turn them off or make them feel rejected because of, the uh, ability to relate, and of course our avoidance or attachment to love. So there are other factors that go within that, but most oftentimes it's because of our relationship to the anima and the animus.